They're here.
I think we all have memories of being 7 years old and stumbling across uncanny, surreal, nightmare-fuel films.
You murdered him!
People are of no value. We could make more sometime, if we need them.
Videos or even creepypastas, depending on if you're one of those dreadful Gen Zers like myself. Media that left us truly confused, though oh so intrigued. Childhood is a time of discovering, learning who we are, our interests, forming a curiosity towards our surroundings, and if you were similar to how I was, drawn to morbid, horrifying aspects of the real world. Most of these are things adults don't even feel comfortable explaining or even really think about. Processing death, loss, overwhelming emotions, and understanding fears and where they stem from. No one wanted to have these conversations with us as kids, so instead we turned to stories to tell us those awful, grim truths relating to our mortality. Sometimes you have to experience the worst in a safe, controlled environment to better appreciate your own life, but also to better understand others and the world around you for how it truly is. The things that frighten or shock us tend to stay rent-free in the back of our minds until years later you stumble across them on YouTube.com and think, oh yeah, I remember Gooby. What the hell was that? And then you're inclined to watch some analysis of it by this guy named Zenni or whatever. After first viewing these types of movies, you either never watch them again out of sheer horror, or you fall in love with them for how unique they were from anything else you had ever witnessed before your very eyes. For me, Coraline is one that falls under the latter. Perhaps I was a little older and wasn't bothered as much, or let's be real, I had watched way worse. I mean, at least this was animated. Nothing graphic or gory. It was PG, the rating of every animated Disney release now. However, unlike the Minions or Super Mario, this was more of a Return to Oz or The Witches PG. The MPAA is often very weird and inconsistent with their morals, determining the outcome of what mainstream audiences a movie is marketed towards. Despite PG standing for parental guidance, some elements may not be suitable for all children. When Coraline was first released in the year of our Lord 2009, it received a decent amount of backlash from older adults, religious.
Smurfs has gone occultic.
Very much so.
Smurfs carry a homosexual connotation in that most of them are male.
Claiming the film was too spooky and not family-friendly enough for their kiddos, which, I mean, hey, who knows? It depends. However, I do think it's a stretch to say that young people as a whole mustn't be allowed to see it, because that risks them learning or being exposed to things that they shouldn't know about. Like abuse by a parent. Why would they ever need to know or recognize that? Besides, learning, testing the water, is a healthy thing. Overprotection is not. Pardon my condescending. Anywho, side rant. I remember back in the olden days, I'm thinking it was 2013-ish, going to my local video rental store and coming across what I assumed, based on the cover art, was a fun, perhaps slightly comedic, Halloween-themed animated motion picture called Coraline. And I was like, okay, love Halloween, guess this seems cool. Director of A Nightmare Before Christmas? Ah, so Tim Burton. I'm so sorry, Henry. So we rented it, and when I returned home and put this thing called a DVD disc into a box known as a DVD player, within the first scene, I was bloody hooked. You see, this wasn't any ordinary CG animated flick of the time. No, these were stop-motion puppets. Of course, I mean, hey, it's Tim Burton.
Edward Penis Hands.
Which is sort of meta, since the story is featuring dolls and sewing button eyes to become a doll. We'll get into all that. Again, as somebody who was already fascinated with the darker and more surreal works of Tim Burton, there was something about the atmosphere, the haunted yet beautiful soundtrack. The whole thing felt so dreamy and comforting, but eerie and ominous. with its slight, uncanny valleyness. There was a certain respect the filmmakers had towards the audience to not talk down or spell the themes out, to portray such heavy themes in a false, unrealistic, sugar-coated sense. I mean, sure, it's not Terry Gilliam's Tideland. Don't worry, Coraline isn't nearly that nihilistic. Thank God.
You don't go shortchanging Daddy, will you, sweetheart?
I won't.
Time for Daddy's vacation.
Still, you got this impression that the people involved understood many kids adore scary, unusual, or weirder things. I mean, just look at the success of Freddy Krueger in the 80s, or Five Nights at Freddy's in the right now. In the years preceding, I found myself wanting more out of these characters, this imaginative world. Then I became aware that Coraline was actually adapted from a novella by award-winning English author Neil Gaiman. Not only that, it was published the same year I started existing, so it was meant to be. And after reading said book in which this wondrous film I fell in love with was based, I concluded that I like the book. The book is better. Shocker, most tend to be. That said, the cinematic reworking is also pretty fantastic. So we're gonna dive into it now for the next 17 hours. Laika Studios is an animation company you can have several opinions about, or potentially zero opinions about, I guess. Originally, it was Will Vinton Studios. Will Vinton was quite a prolific and influential claymation animator during the 80s and 90s. He worked on the California Raisins and many other commercials, animation effects for Disney's Return to Oz, Michael Jackson's experimental musical Moonwalker, and much, much more. By the late 90s, the studio sought investors interested in funding larger feature-length films. This included the founder of Nike, Phil Knight, and his son Travis, and this is when things took a turn. We enter the early 2000s. Phil has now become the majority shareholder, and Vinton has been dismissed. Forced out of the company over failure to garner funds to produce further feature projects, along with losing ownership of his name, trademark, and essentially his entire body of work. He then filed a lawsuit, and there was a whole legal battle between Knight and Vinton for ownership rights. I'm summarizing. It was all a mess. Ultimately, in the end, the billionaire won, and Will lost everything, because he wasn't a good enough businessman to keep the company afloat. If you're curious to learn more about the life and legacy of Will Vinton, I recommend the fairly recent documentary Clay Dreams. In 2005, Knight rebranded the studio to Laika, named after the stray dog who was the first creature to be blasted into space by the Soviet Union. At first, they planned to develop both stop-motion and CG animated features. However, when their 2008 project Jack and Ben's Animated Adventure fell through, the studio laid off a significant portion of its computer animation department to exclusively focus on creating stop-motion films, the very first of which ended up being the 2009 adaptation of Coraline. Henry Selick, who was no stranger to the medium, had already been working at the studio a few years as a supervising director, signed on to direct. Neil Gaiman approved of this choice as he was already a big fan of his previous work, and was even more impressed once he saw them bring certain abstract descriptions from the book to the physical world.
In the book, I could describe something indescribable. I could talk about walking through a fog and the way that the trees stop being trees and just become things that look like the idea of trees. And what's astonishing is they've done it.
Production lasted a total of 4 years, involving 400 crew members. 130 sets were constructed across 52 different stages. It took 3 to 4 months to construct one single puppet, from mold makers, painters, armaturists, hair fabricators, and a single person who designed and knitted all the miniature costumes. Involved over 200,000 3D printed replaceable faces, with a total of 35 animators. Shooting carried on for 18 months, as 1 week equals equaled roughly 90 seconds of completed footage. All this is to say, stop motion is incredibly tedious, but it paid off as Coraline opened in theaters on the 6th of February in Real D 3D, making double its budget and then some. For those who were already fans of the original novel, the plot of the film stayed mostly similar. The story is pretty straightforward and takes much inspiration from classic grim fairy tales such as Hansel and Gretel and Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, with a splash of The Wizard of Oz. It follows a young, lonely girl named Coraline Jones who has recently moved cross-country with her family. While exploring her new home, she discovers a mysterious secret door that leads her to a parallel world where her parents show her love and affection at every moment. She's given gifts, treats, and other marvelous wonders, before uncovering the more sinister truth about this alternate, manufactured world. It turns out that her other mother is planning to keep Coraline there against her will to feast on her flesh for power and lock her soul away with all the other dead children she has kept as prisoners dating back to like the 1700s. So,
That's nice.
with that basic summary out of the way, let's jump right in. The movie opens with a rather disturbing sequence in which a pair of sharp needle hands surgically dissect a doll with what appears to be an antique 18th century embalming kit. The process is eerily accurate to how morticians prepare a corpse by filling the body with cotton to prevent leaks and smells, sawdust to fill out the body and make it appear, alive for the funeral. Oh, and also they sew the eyes and mouth shut. I should also mention for context that this sequence starts with the doll form of what is later revealed to be the previous child victim, and so this essentially represents their corpse. Not to mention the enchanting, almost melancholic score consisting of a child's choir chanting. Evidently, while sounding French, there isn't an official translation. That's because it's mainly random sounds and unintelligible gibberish. After that chilling opening, we are introduced to Coraline and her family moving into a drab, dilapidated apartment complex known as the Pink Palace, the once mansion that has since been sectioned into 3 levels. Each features its own wacky and unique characters. The attic, in which the eccentric Russian gymnast Mr. Bobinsky resides, he supposedly is working on a jumping mouse circus, and there are 2 theories as to why his skin is blue. Actually, 3. The first is that he wears next to nothing in the middle of winter, so potentially hypothermia. Second, the metal Bobinsky wears indicates that he was a liquidator during the Chernobyl disaster of 1986. So it could be a result of radiation exposure. Or thirdly, he's blue, dabba-dee-dabba-die. Anyway, at the bottom level, the basement, lives April Spink and Miriam Forcible, an elderly couple who are retired burlesque dancers with a long passion for theater performance. Now in the novel, the story takes place in England and has many references and slang tied to British culture throughout, naturally, as that's where Neil Gaiman grew up. However, Selick decided early on he wanted to relocate the movie to the United States, having Coraline move from Michigan to Ashland, Oregon. He wasn't sure how to transfer Spink and Forcible to the US, so he chose Ashland specifically for their famous Shakespeare Festival. The characters in the film are naturally heightened for animation. Appearances and personalities are colorful and quirky compared to their grounded, pragmatic depictions in the book, but that's largely in part due to the tonal differences. The novel is less whimsical and exaggerated, instead opting for realism. Mr. Bobinsky, who is referred to as Mr. Bobo, is described as a rather recluse older man, whereas in the movie, he's constantly seen performing backflips and stunts. Then there's Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, who spend more time arguing as comedic relief, not present in the source material. Of course, those weren't the largest changes between the characters. The most notable inclusion was a neighbor kid named Wyborn, or Wybie, a whole new character for Coraline to interact with so she wouldn't be wandering around talking to herself the whole time. Might be a bit strange. I'm doing it right now. Again, overall the film kept things similar to that of the book. However, Selick thought a direct translation of the material would result in the length of a Rankin Bass special, so they fleshed out the screenplay, making some subtle as well as slightly more noticeable adjustments. Adding Wybie helped translate the text of inner dialogue into the visual medium to feel more organic, in addition to being an easy placement for delivering exposition, the history behind the Pink Palace. We discover that Wybie's grandmother, Miss Lovat, not only owns the building, but she also grew up there with her now missing, presumably stolen, twin sister. Because of this, she is very protective of Wybie and doesn't allow him or any other attendants with children to stay at the Pink Palace, despite this rule not applying to the Jones family for whatever reason. I'm pretty sure it's like financial obligations. Apparently, Miss Lovat has stored an old doll that once belonged to her sister before she tragically vanished. Wybie at one point finds the doll and gives it to Coraline, as it coincidentally, or not, resembles her to a T, which isn't off-putting or the least bit concerning in the slightest to either of them. This is when we rewind to the opening scene where we witness one ragdoll child altered into what appears to be Coraline decides to keep the gift as a companion of sorts, despite claiming that she's too old for dolls. It's better than nothing, which leads us perfectly into her parents. Throughout the film, Coraline's mother and father, Mel and Charlie, are caught up in their work, currently writing and editing a gardening catalog, despite not being outdoorsy people themselves. Her parents often seem emotionally distant and don't tend to listen to their daughter, treating her as a nuisance, that they simply don't have much time or energy to focus on her. So Coraline spends her waking hours bored, alone, in a mostly empty new house, while her parents push her along, out of the way, never explaining to her why they don't have time to play or do the things that she enjoys. Just that they are too busy and need to work instead of spending time with her. She doesn't feel wanted or heard. I mean, for us, the viewers, it's obvious Mel and Charlie are working class parents, stressed, overworking themselves, just trying to keep up. We also learn of a recent car accident, meaning they're also likely dealing with medical bills. The saddest thing is that there's this lack of balance or compromise. Her parents work from home, which, as we've all learned from the pandemic, is a tough act to juggle. Deep down, Mel and Charlie care for Coraline. It's just they're sacrificing being present together as a family in the moment so that they don't lose the bare minimum of living in the future. Her mother can be quite cold, and so can Coraline, something that is emphasized heavily in the film compared to the book. Many have said that they side more with her mother and father and understand where they're coming from and find Coraline herself to be bratty, rude, and selfish. I think as we age, we tend to forget the difficulties of being a child because childhood is easy, simple. You don't have a job, didn't pay taxes, bills, etc., etc. Though people experience struggles and conflicts in all stages of life. Things from the past only ever appear simpler because we are viewing them from the perspective of the present, which is always changing in new and unexpected ways. When you're young, everyone is talking down to you. You're barely even seen as a person, a human being with valid thoughts and expressive wide emotions that are also new and difficult. It causes this divide in how we judge the younger, heck, rebellious generations, not on an individual person-to-person level. Yes, Coraline can be sassy, rude, and arrogant, since she's absorbing that from her mother. She insults Wybie because she's projecting her insecurities. They treat her as an inconvenience and probably wonders why she was born. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but you understand that that's the reason she's acting the way she is. We're also products of our environment in some way. The people with whom we surround ourselves with impact the type of person we are. We all can be selfish. Many adults can be spoiled, rude, and judgmental without even recognizing it, and then blindly project that onto their kids. There's this running bit where no one remembers her name, despite constantly correcting them, so Coraline believes they don't understand and aren't listening to what she's saying, just like her parents. While trying to find anything to entertain herself, Coraline's father suggests going around the house to explore, so she counts all the doors and windows, writing down how dull and painfully boring each item is. This is where she discovers something intriguing, a mysterious small door. Mel unlocks it for her as long as doing so keeps her daughter quiet. However, they quickly find that whatever was once there has now been bricked off. Now the door here is much smaller compared to the average one she finds in the novel. I almost prefer this change as, yeah, it's the perfect height. A small child would be intrigued to know where it might lead. It stands out.
They must have closed this off when they divided up the house.
You're kidding.
That night, Coraline hears a mouse and follows it downstairs and into the door, now finding that the bricks are no longer there, and instead it's a long, colorful, almost hypnotizing tunnel leading her into Narnia. Oh my god, what happened to Narnia? So in this dimension, this mirrored reality, Coraline's parents have buttons for eyes, and Coraline is understandably very confused by this revelation. Like okay. This other mother tells Coraline to check up on her other father, and we get a little musical number that may or may not contain cryptic foreshadowing lyrics. The song in which the other father sings was performed by John Linnell, co-founder of the alternative rock band They Might Be Giants. They created more music for the film, though most of it was cut during the production process as they couldn't get the sound to match the darker tone of the movie. He sings about how when Coraline comes around exploring, he and the other mother will never make it boring. Their eyes will be on Coraline. Here, she can expect to receive all the attention, the best foods, the nicest materials. All the voids, superficially or not, will be filled. Her first night in the other world is full of phantasmagoric displays and wondrous designs. You quickly notice the juxtaposition between the color and overall atmosphere in both dimensions. One is muted and washed out, cold, dull, and flat. Coraline is the one splash of color in an otherwise lifeless landscape. The other, however, is very alive, saturated, and vibrant. It looks amazing in 4K. There's greater depth. This is where viewing it in 3D really immerses you into the film, this alternative world, the same way Coraline gets immersed. During the dinner scene, the ambience is slightly off-putting, this feeling that it's surely too good to be true. We're anticipating a catch for things to take a turn, though compared to the book, things escalate more gradually. Each time Coraline returns, it's as if she's peeling back the layers, progressively getting closer and closer to the center, and uncovering the truth of it. At first, we aren't even fully sure whether these events are real or just some fever-induced nightmare, as Coraline only ever sees the portal at night, and always wakes up safe and sound in her real bed the next morning. Not only that, the neighbors don't appear in the other world until she first visits them in the real one. Dreams are key to filing fragments of memory and can be influenced by feelings and thoughts you experienced earlier in that day. So yeah, initially, we aren't even certain that any of this stuff is happening, despite the small warnings given by the other residents suggesting otherwise. The other characters Coraline meets include the other Mr. Bobinsky. He's presented, like everyone else, to be the idealistic counterpart, who does indeed run a jumping mouse circus. During this sequence, they finally get her name right. She goes to the show with the other Wybie, who in the other mother's words, has been fixed. Okay, that's not what hold on, he can't talk for himself. Coraline finds him annoying in the real world, therefore in this world he is incapable of speaking. Kind of the first big warning sign of an abusive tactic that the other mother perceives as acceptable. The third time Coraline enters into this other dimension is during the middle of the day. It's always been a nightly thing. This reveals that it is for sure actually occurring and indeed not a dream. A subtle detail is that every time she arrives, treats are always waiting. Extravagant, delicious meals, desserts, and gifts.
I love dinner breakfast food.
So I'm now just realizing that we have yet to mention the cat in the hat, which also starred Dakota Fanning. The cat is an intellectual, interdimensional companion who comes and goes in the other world. He can speak, vanish, and appear on a whim, dropping clues, hints, and other snarky, mildly sarcastic remarks about the disturbing nature of this seemingly perfect world. Then, of course, there's Miss Spink and Miss Forcible. Their doppelgangers are introduced during a theatrical performance inspired by Odysseus and the Sirens and the Birth of Venus paintings, before they reveal themselves to be much younger versions of the now retired actresses. In the book, they involve Coraline in the show with a knife-throwing circus act involving balloons. The filmmakers instead decided on a more exciting trapeze act, as Miss Spink and Forcible go back and forth quoting Hamlet out of context, leaving out all the parts of the monologue where he, yes, describes the world as wondrous and beautiful, but also deceptive and hollow, an illusion of sorts, that mankind is merely dust. So that's interesting. After this scene, Coraline is asked if she likes it in this world, and Wybie seems uncomfortable all of a sudden, as Coraline proclaims how much she loves it here. Everything is so amazing and magical. The other mother then looks at Wybie, who is saddened and concerned by her reaction, and suggests for him to pull a joker, to force a smile, and pretend. The other mother informs Coraline that she could stay here forever and be loved, play games, and receive all the attention she isn't getting at home. However, the one small, rather inconsequential caveat is to allow her to sew buttons into Coraline's eyes. As they say, the eyes are the windows to the soul. The buttons in this world represent control over one's autonomy, as in, the other mother owns them. They have no identity of their own. You become blind to the circumstances and this reality. So yeah, did I mention the producer had to be convinced to make this not a live-action adaptation? Imagine how fucking terrifying that would have turned out for the kiddies. This whole escalation of giving and giving, making you feel comfortable and safe, building this trust, until it's now this manipulative, you need to do this thing for me. Or like, why can't you do this thing for me? After everything, come on, we're friends, it'll be fine. The moment you refuse, that's when the attitude flips and it becomes pressuring and understating the reality of what this means. The impact, the injury. You gotta do it if you wish for all of this to continue. If you want me to still engage with you. All that internalization leads to this guilt. It makes you believe you're the one who caused the issue. Everything was going good until I didn't do this one thing. What if I did? It sucks. Now Coraline has to try and trick the other parents and somehow find a way back to her real home, safe and sound, before it's too late. Obviously, the answer has been simply going to sleep, but since she left during the afternoon, this time that doesn't work out. The only other exit would be the small door, which she attempts but can't access. Therefore, she goes and speaks with the other father, who is kind of like in idle mode. He's not really doing or saying much. He's just sort of there as a prop. When this fails, she runs out of the house just to get away, only to discover that nothing exists beyond a certain mark. It starts to look reminiscent of the 13th floor or the Matrix. Eventually, Coraline enters into an entirely blank canvas, an infinite white void. The cat informs her that the other mother only creates what she knows will impress each child. It's a small, narrow bubble of space that they can't escape from, taking away all the exterior forces or influences. They both walk around the world, leading them directly back to the Pink Palace. Turns out the jumping mice aren't even what they appear to be. Coraline goes inside and breaks open the door to the drawing room, only to be confronted by the other mother and all this amazing insect furniture. Honestly, okay, side note, this film would make an extraordinary haunted house. Halloween Horror Nights, perhaps? That would be fucking sick. Demonic people with button eyes jumping out at you, and you can go through the tunnel. Why hasn't this happened? All right, back to our regularly scheduled whatever this is. Coraline is ready to leave and go back to her real parents. Doesn't wish to stay any longer. The other mother is like, "Is that any way to speak to your mother?" And Coraline's like, "You're not my mother." The other mother instructs her to apologize. She doesn't, and the other mother begins transforming into an elongated, almost Cruella de Vil form, skeletal, a Tim Burton character. Anywho, as she's doing this, she's also counting down from 3, for Coraline to be nice and apologize, respect her authority, gets to 3, grabs her by the nose, and throws her through the looking glass as a timeout to teach Coraline a lesson about
learn to be a loving daughter.
let me, the nightmare person, steal your soul, or something. It's here in this dark, secret corridor that Coraline comes across 3 ghost children who were previous victims of the other mother, whom they refer to as the Beldam. In the novel, the illustrations were done by Dave McKean, and the artwork of this room with the children is extra eerie. It's more claustrophobic with the shadows and the line work. In the movie, this scene was accomplished by first shooting the puppets at a low frame rate, and then layering those frames over each other using dissolves, creating this ghostly effect. Another fun detail is that the ghost boy is voiced by George Selick, Henry Selick's son. The 3 essentially explained to Coraline how they ended up in this state. The Beldam told them she loved them and cared for them until she ate up their lives. They asked Coraline if she would be willing to locate their missing eyes so that they too can be set free, and she says she'll do her best. This conversation lasts longer in the book as the ghost children tell her that they can't escape the dark because the other mother has stolen their hearts. That if the 3 stepped outside and came in contact with the sun, they would shrivel up and burn. It's a little more graphic. Also in the novel, she spends multiple days and nights in the other world, while the other world in the film stays dark. It's always the middle of the night, either implying that the darkness is always lurking over everything, or this world is removed from everything, that it's floating farther out in space. Therefore, the part about shriveling up in the sun is irrelevant to the movie version. Ultimately, the other mother lets Coraline out of the mirror the next morning. In the film, it's Wybie, who has been forced to smile. He's also wearing the oven mitt that the Beldam previously was shown using, representing how Wybie is like a puppet, that the other mother has her hand in all of this. And it's revealed that Wybie is nothing more than sawdust, tying back to the out-of-context Hamlet quote from earlier that this was alluding to, mankind in the end being nothing but dust. The passageway is no longer lit with blue and purple, it's all decrepit and dusty. There are cobwebs everywhere, which may be foreshadowing, and we see all these toys and other child belongings. After managing to barely make it out alive, Coraline quickly realizes that her parents are now missing. The Wybie that has free will declares that his grandmother wants the doll back. For the movie, the dolls are an addition to the story and are used as spies for the Beldam to get an idea of each kid.
You don't believe me? You can ask the cat.
The cat.
With no one else to turn to for help, she visits Miss Spink and Forcible, who don't help much at all. They're too busy arguing and focusing on themselves. As kids, you just sort of believe adults have it all figured out. They know everything. Then, come to find out, no one knows anything. And we're all trying to figure things out, forever, all the time, until we die. None of the adults Coraline encounters are all too present, too caught up in other important tasks. Coraline has to take on what none of the other adults around her are willing or brave enough to confront, because they're all in denial. They won't take the time to listen or hear me out. Miss Spink and Forcible probably just assume Coraline is pretending or playing a little game anyway, nothing serious, so they aren't attentive. All they do is make her this triangular eyepiece that allows her to search for lost things, avoid danger, and that's it. Good luck, have fun. Turns out the other mother captured her real parents, and so Coraline has to take it upon herself, risk her life to save them. Because, let's face it, no one else is going to. After stepping back into the alternate world, she strikes a deal with the Beldam, that if she not only finds her parents, but also locates the 3 ghost eyes, everyone gets sent free. And if Coraline fails, she has to stay there forever and do whatever the other mother wishes. Now this third act, final battle of sorts, does play out significantly stronger in the novel, as Coraline has to prove to herself that she can do this all on her own. To scavenge each of the ghost eyes against all the threats and traps that are in place. Nobody else is there to guide her or to help her out. Unfortunately, this is downplayed more so in the film. When things get difficult, someone else is there to handle the situation. The other father just kind of hands one of the ghost eyes to her. When it seems like all is lost, the cat shows up and suddenly all is right. It de-emphasizes the whole lesson. After retrieving all the ghost eyes, Coraline goes inside as the world around her is peeling away, quickly vanishing. It's here we see the Beldam in her truest form, resembling a mix between a skeleton and a Black Widow spider. Also, the lighting and set design during this confrontation, similar to the first, but even more grotesque, amazing. Seriously, there needs to be a haunted house. All of this gradually evolves. Each time Coraline returned, the other mother was slowly anamorphing into this final stage. Her outfits got progressively more gothic, and again, everything in the house became more macabre and sinister. She's comparable to Pennywise. She's this ancient, cosmic, shape-shifting being. Coraline now has to locate where her parents are being imprisoned. Of course, knowing the Beldam, she isn't going to let Coraline flee so easily. So she tells her that her real parents are behind the small, locked door. While distracted, Coraline assesses the room until the cat directs her to an out-of-place snow globe on the mantelpiece. After opening the door, only to find an empty passageway, the other mother smugly proclaims that she will now stay there forever. But Coraline victoriously declines, and without a moment of thought, grabs and launches the cat at the Beldam. He scratches out her button eyes while Coraline just sort of lingers for some reason. The other mother angrily calls her out as a cheater, and the whole floor descends into a giant deep web before lunging at the screen in 3D, which is horrifying. She uses her vibration senses to chase Coraline, who then barely makes it out of all of this alive. With some help from the ghost children, she's able to close and lock the door, because I guess it can be locked from both sides. You know what, whatever. Coraline runs through the tunnel as the Beldam bangs on the door, repeatedly yelling for her to not leave, that she will die without her. But Coraline makes it back to her flat, slams the door at the perfect moment, and all is fine and dandy. She reunites with her real parents, who have no memory of anything. Even with the snow melting on them, they've finished their catalog and can finally enjoy some time together. Coraline apologizes to the cat for throwing him at the Beldam due to the high stress and anxiety of it all. And we get this scene with her parents tucking her into bed, and Mel places a present under the covers and just walks out. For context, earlier Coraline went shopping with her mom and really wanted these gloves because she thought that they were unique from her more traditional, boring gray school uniform. Turns out her mother went back and bought them for her, didn't stay expecting some grand reaction. It's just a subtle, nice little moment. Coraline then goes to sleep, and we get the heaviest sequence involving CG. The setting is obviously inspired by the Starry Night painting. Looking back, there's a decent few references to famous historical paintings in this movie. In the dream, the ghost children are definitively set free. However, they warn her that as long as the key is within reach, Coraline is not safe. So she figures the best place to dispose of it would be the bottomless well. The other mother's hand manages to slip under the door and pursues Coraline to that said well, and this entire succession of events is paced out way longer in the book. Like, instead of it being all in one night, the hand stalks Coraline over a week, until planning a picnic one afternoon where she places the mat over the well with the key laying in the center, so when the hand goes to grab it, it would subsequently fall in. A clever trick that she thinks of on her own, and in the film, it treats this as almost a second big, ultimate, suspenseful climax. Instead of Coraline facing these conflicts on her own, this time Wybie is involved, and the takeaway theme is being there for your friends in times of crisis, working together, even if it is a little odd that he was conveniently out and about the night of. I'm a little on the fence with this ending. The change is understandable, it's more climactic for the medium, and I think it's just a matter of overall preference. The next day, we're transitioning into spring. Earlier it was President's Day. But yeah, everyone is out gardening. Wybie and his grandmother show up, so Coraline can attempt to explain everything about the ghost children, her sister. She'll likely just believe it's all in her imagination. And we end on an exterior shot of the Pink Palace, the same shot we opened on, and the cat leaves us on a shocking, mysterious cliffhanger as he vanishes. The ability he was only shown to possess in the other world. And it's neat, but it's also given birth to countless theories and speculations. Who knows, maybe she never escaped. Honestly, I don't really care to fall down that rabbit hole, House of Leaves style, so I'm sorry. However, I do still love this film, despite some of my gripes and how it was translated from the source material. On its own, I think the story still delivers an important and thoughtful perspective onto childhood that not only explores the highs but also the lows. We don't like to think back and believe that we too at some point were neglected, that our needs weren't met. Times when we felt trapped and misunderstood or struggled with something and didn't know how to express it to a parental figure. Instead, it's easier to reminisce on the positive experiences, the moments that weren't so bad. Sometimes we play defense. We convince ourselves that, hey, it wasn't all bad, it could have been worse.
Darling, we only want what's best for you.
The truth is, we spend our youth taking in life, encountering both positive and negative things, and then we spend our adult years trying to figure out what all of that was, how this has impacted the way I judge myself and the rest of the world around me, uncluttering and finally being able to process all the shit that I have undermined or ignored for the past several years. Because you just assumed it was normal, that's life. Coraline is a cautionary tale. We truly witness a dichotomy of the two polar opposite negative parenting methods/traits. One is emotionally and physically controlling, indulgent, and involved in every aspect of the child's life. The other mother is warm on the outside and cold on the inside. Coraline's real mother is emotionally distant and sometimes cold on the outside, but deep down, she does care. The other mother will die without Coraline, only cares about her wants, her needs. Any child would wish to escape either of the two, honestly. To receive more attention or less attention, the other parents are more involved in her interests. They appear loving and humble to everyone. The last people you would expect to be abusive because they seemed most trustworthy. Create that false sense of security, a slanted worldview. The other mother does all these wonderful things, so yeah, she must be caring based on my experience with her. She's a good person. It's about being observant towards your surroundings, the importance of communication and consideration from both parent and child, striking a balance in escape and allowing yourself to slow down and enjoy the smaller things. Even if life gets inconvenient and painful in the real world, Coraline now knows she has the strength to find a way to cope, to face those challenges, and to stand up for what she believes in.
Mr. B's not drunk, Mom. He's just eccentric.
As if she can escape a powerful, controlling entity like the Beldam, she surely can find a way to appreciate boredom, understand that she can depend on herself when her parents aren't around or don't listen. Of course, apart from that, the animation is amazing. It's a gorgeous looking film. The score doesn't get enough praise. It complements the dreamy, nightmarish atmosphere very well. It's widely considered a modern classic. They did a Simpsons Treehouse of Horror inspired short, which wasn't even that bad, and they even got Neil Gaiman to voice Snowball.
Already the talking cat isn't the most interesting thing.
What else? I don't know. It's held up very well, and it's something I find myself revisiting quite often. I wish the subgenre of preteen centered coming of age dark fantasy was still a thing. Movies that don't talk down to kids with overly simplified morals. It's becoming more rare, but Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio was pretty good. Anyway, I'm rambling and you're probably clicking off, so we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, hit the like button and it'll light up and shoot confetti. It's pretty cool. You should check it out. Subscribing is also neat too. Let me know in the comments what spookier, weirder movies you enjoyed or just meant a lot to you during your formative years, or what your thoughts are on Coraline, the book, the graphic novel. Apparently there was a video game. Did anybody play it? I don't know. So yeah, that's all. These outros are never not awkward. Okay, goodbye.